The folder had barely touched the table when William said the one sentence Camilla had been praying she would never hear. Charles cannot change it. I cannot change it. Diana made the decision herself. Camilla stared at him. No argument, no sharp reply, not even the familiar look of defiance. Just silence. Then William pushed the document across the polished table and added the part that broke whatever composure she had left. It is final. Camilla's hand moved toward the folder, but stopped before touching it, because the name stamped beneath the seal wasn't William's. It wasn't Charles's. It was Diana's. But that wasn't the real shock. The real shock was that Charles had apparently known this moment was coming, yet he had allowed Camilla to walk into the room believing he could still protect her. So why hadn't he warned her? And what exactly had Diana decided all those years ago that could still leave the Queen shaking today? 3 days earlier, the atmosphere inside Clarence's house had felt completely different. Camilla wasn't panicking then. She was confident. A private request had been prepared regarding Belmere House, a secluded country residence hidden behind stone walls, old woodland, and nearly 200 acres of land. It wasn't one of the famous royal palaces. Tourists didn't gather outside its gates. Cameras didn't follow every car that entered. That was precisely why it mattered. Belmere offered privacy. Permanent privacy. The kind of place where Camilla's relatives could stay without palace staff watching every movement, without photographers waiting at the road, without every visit becoming a headline. There was only one problem. Belmere had once belonged to a private trust connected to Diana. Camilla's advisors believed that problem could be handled. After all, William was Prince of Wales. Charles was king. Any old restriction buried inside a private family arrangement could surely be reviewed, delayed, or quietly interpreted in a more convenient way. That was the assumption. But someone had already warned Camilla not to make it. Princess Anne. During a tense family conversation, Anne had reportedly looked directly at Camilla and said just 6 words. That property was never Charles's to promise. Camilla dismissed it as another cold warning from a woman who had never completely accepted her place. But Anne wasn't guessing. She had seen the second document, and Camilla hadn't. The first document was harmless enough. It described Belmere House, its surrounding land, the maintenance fund, the trustees, and the eventual transfer of authority to Diana's sons. Nothing explosive, nothing humiliating. But attached to it was a sealed instruction. 7 paragraphs, 2 signatures, one condition that changed everything. The residence could pass through Diana's bloodline. It could be managed by her sons. It could be used by their children. It could even be temporarily occupied by individuals approved unanimously by the trustees. But control could never be transferred to the spouse of a reigning monarch or to that spouse's adult children from another family. Read that again. This wasn't a vague preference. It wasn't a handwritten wish someone could ignore. It was a restriction. Specific, deliberate, legally embedded. But why would Diana include language that seemed to anticipate a future situation no one was publicly discussing at the time? That question disturbed William more than the clause itself, because the document had been signed before Diana's death, before Camilla became queen, before Charles openly married her, before anyone could have known exactly how the royal family would look decades later. Yet Diana had drawn a line around Belmere House as though she already knew somebody would eventually try to cross it. Camilla's request did not ask for ownership. That would have looked too aggressive. Instead, it asked for what her advisors called an extended family occupancy arrangement. Soft words, carefully chosen words, but beneath the language, the purpose was obvious. Camilla wanted Belmere placed at the disposal of her family for long-term private use. No transfer on paper. No dramatic announcement. Just access, staff, security, maintenance, and the quiet understanding that once her family settled there, removing them would become almost impossible. It was clever, but William saw the trap immediately. Temporary access could become permanent expectation. Permanent expectation could become implied entitlement. Then, 10 years later, everyone would ask the same question. Why remove them now? So William refused to sign. Camilla didn't accept the refusal. She went to Charles. That was when the situation stopped being a disagreement over a house and became a direct test of who held power inside the family. Charles listened to Camilla's argument privately. She told him Belmere was sitting mostly unused. She said the arrangement would reduce security costs elsewhere. She reminded him that her family had spent years being treated like outsiders. Then she made the argument that cut deeper than all the others. Your family has residences everywhere. Mine is expected to ask permission to visit. Charles didn't promise her ownership. He didn't have to. He promised to speak to William, and Camilla heard what she wanted to hear. The king would intervene. The son would retreat. The old document would be treated like an emotional relic from a dead marriage. But Charles's conversation with William did not go the way Camilla expected. William arrived carrying a red leather folder. Charles asked him to reconsider. William asked whether he had read the complete trust instrument. Charles said he understood its purpose. William repeated the question. Have you read all of it? Charles looked toward the window. That hesitation told William everything. The king had seen the general document. He had not seen the sealed instruction. Or worse, he had seen it years earlier and chosen to forget what it said. William opened the folder. He placed the restriction in front of his father. Charles read the 7 paragraphs slowly. Then he reached the final page. Diana's signature sat at the bottom. Beside it was the signature of a witness Charles immediately recognized. Princess Anne. Wait, what? Anne hadn't written the restriction. She hadn't controlled the trust. But Diana had asked her to witness the final instruction because she wanted one senior royal who could never be pressured into pretending it didn't exist. Not a courtier. Not an employee. Not someone whose position depended on Charles. Anne, the sister who would tell a king no without lowering her eyes. Suddenly her warning to Camilla made sense. That property was never Charles's to promise. Anne wasn't insulting her. She was stating a fact. Charles closed the document. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Charles said something William wasn't prepared for. This will destroy her. Not, the document is invalid. Not, you have misunderstood it. Not even, Diana would have changed her mind. His first concern was what enforcing it would do to Camilla. William's expression changed. Because in that instant, the argument became bigger than Belmere House. Diana's final instruction was being treated as an inconvenience because it embarrassed the woman who replaced her. William leaned forward. And what do you think ignoring it would do to her? Charles understood exactly who he meant. Diana. For nearly 30 years, other people had explained her choices, softened her anger, interpreted her words, and decided which parts of her story were respectable enough to preserve. But this wasn't a television interview. It wasn't a disputed memory. It was her signature. There was nothing to reinterpret. Still, Charles asked for time. That was his mistake. Because while the king was asking William to delay, Camilla's advisors were already behaving as though the arrangement had been approved. A preliminary inventory of Belmere had been requested. Security access had been discussed. A decorating consultant had been contacted. Nothing had physically moved into the house yet, but the machinery had started. William learned about it through one email. The subject line read, Belmere transition. Transition, not review. Not proposal. Transition. Someone had begun planning the transfer before William had given consent, and the name copied at the bottom of that email made his blood run cold. One of Charles's senior household aides. Now William had a new question. Had Camilla moved too quickly? Or had someone inside the king's household told her the decision was already as good as done? That's where the story turns. William didn't call Camilla. He called Anne. Anne answered on the second ring. William read the email aloud. She didn't interrupt. When he finished, she said, "Then you must end it in the room, not over the telephone." William knew what she meant. No private reassurance. No carefully worded letter that could be reinterpreted later. Everyone involved had to hear the decision at the same time. Camilla, Charles, the trustees, the household representatives. The lawyers? No escape route. No one could later claim William had agreed to reconsider. A meeting was arranged for Friday morning, but Charles did not attend. Officially, the king's schedule had changed. Unofficially, his absence spoke louder than anything he might have said in the room. Camilla arrived expecting him to join by telephone. He didn't. She expected one of his representatives to argue for a compromise. They didn't. She expected William to soften the restriction into a temporary pause. He didn't. He walked in with Anne beside him. That was the moment Camilla realized the outcome had already been decided. Anne took a seat near the end of the table. She carried no papers. She didn't need them. William placed the red folder in front of Camilla. One of the trustees explained that Belmere House was not controlled by the Crown Estate, the Duchy of Lancaster, or the sovereign in his official capacity. It was private. The restriction remained valid. The proposed occupancy arrangement could not proceed. Camilla listened without moving. Then she asked the only question that still mattered. Has Charles approved this? William could have protected his father. He could have said the king had been consulted. He could have hidden behind legal language. Instead, he told the truth. He has no authority to approve or reject it. That sentence humiliated Charles, without Charles even being in the room. The king could command ceremonies. He could appoint officials. He could open Parliament beneath a golden crown. But inside Belmere House, Diana's signature carried more power than his. Camilla's voice tightened. So this is your decision. William looked at the folder. No, that's the point you keep missing. Then came the sentence that shattered her final hope. This was my mother's decision. I am merely refusing to erase it. Camilla looked toward Anne, perhaps expecting some sign of sympathy. Anne gave her none. But she didn't look triumphant either. That made it worse. Triumph would have made this personal. Anne's expression said the outcome had never been in doubt. Camilla asked whether the document could be challenged. The solicitor answered carefully. Any challenge would require Camilla to argue that Diana lacked the capacity to understand what she had signed, that the trustees had acted improperly, or that the restriction violated the trust's lawful purpose. Each argument carried a danger. To attack the document, Camilla would have to attack Diana, publicly. She would have to stand before the country as queen and suggest that the late Princess of Wales did not understand her own decisions. Imagine the reaction, the photographs, the headlines. William knew she would never risk it. Camilla knew he knew. That was the cage. The document couldn't simply be ignored, but challenging it would create a scandal far worse than losing Belmere House. She turned to William. Did you bring me here to humiliate me? His answer came without hesitation. No, you were brought here because your household began planning a transition that had never been approved. The air changed. Until then, Camilla had believed William was defending an old decision. Now she realized he was accusing her side of trying to outrun it. She denied authorizing the email. William slid a printed copy across the table. There it was. Belmere transition. Names, dates, proposed inspection times. A line discussing which rooms would require personal family adaptation. William tapped that sentence once. Who gave them permission to write this? Camilla read the page again. Her face changed. Because she recognized the aide's name. The person hadn't acted for William. The trustees hadn't instructed him. Only one household could have made Camilla believe the process was moving forward. Charles's. And suddenly the king's absence looked different. Was he avoiding a confrontation? Or had he allowed Camilla to believe he could deliver something he never had the power to give? For the first time that morning, Camilla's anger moved away from William. she whispered. He told me it would be handled. Nobody answered. She repeated it. This time her voice cracked. He told me it would be handled. Anne finally spoke. Perhaps he believed it would. 5 words. Brutal words. Because they offered Charles the kindest explanation possible, but exposed the ugliest truth. The king had promised influence where he had none. Camilla's eyes filled, but she fought it. She accused William of using Diana's memory as a weapon. William didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. My mother wrote the restriction. Your household tried to bypass it. Which one of us turned her into a weapon? Silence again. If you enjoy royal stories where one buried detail changes the entire balance of power, subscribe now, because what William revealed next made the house itself look almost irrelevant. Belmere's maintenance fund had grown for decades. The property, land, investments, and associated trust were now worth far more than Camilla's advisors had understood. But William wasn't taking personal control of the income. He had signed a separate instruction that morning. The estate would be preserved for Diana's grandchildren, not sold, not converted into a royal retreat, not absorbed into Charles's household. Preserved. George, Charlotte, and Louis would eventually inherit equal protective interests, but none could sell the house alone. Harry's children would also retain a protected family interest through their father's share. That was the twist. William wasn't using the document to seize something for himself. He was locking it away from everyone, including himself. Camilla had expected a battle between her family and William. Instead, William had removed the prize from the current generation entirely. He had made Diana's grandchildren the future guardians of her decision. Camilla wiped her cheek and stared at the papers. So nobody wins. William closed the folder halfway. No, the people she intended to protect win. That was when Camilla finally broke. Not loudly. No dramatic collapse. Something quieter. Her shoulders lowered. Her eyes fixed on Diana's signature. The fight simply left her face. Because this was no longer about access to a private country house. It was about the limit Diana had drawn around the future. A limit Charles could not cross. A limit Camilla could not negotiate. A limit William had just extended to the next generation. But Anne still had one final page. She reached into the red folder and removed an envelope that had never been included in the copies sent to Camilla's advisors. It contained a short handwritten note from Diana to the trustees. No accusations, no names, just one sentence explaining why the restriction existed. William read it silently first. Then he looked at Anne. Anne nodded. So William read it aloud. Some homes must remain safe from the people who believe love gives them ownership. Camilla closed her eyes. Charles had once believed marrying Camilla would finally settle the past. William had just proven the past still held legal authority over the future. The meeting ended minutes later. Camilla left without the folder. Without Belmere, without the promise Charles had made her. But the most devastating sight came after she was gone. William stood alone beside the table, holding the document bearing his mother's signature, while Anne quietly closed the door. No celebration, no smile, just a son realizing that almost 30 years after Diana lost her place inside the royal family, she had still managed to protect one doorway they could never force open. Tell me in the comments whether William was defending his mother or deliberately humiliating Charles, and subscribe before the next royal decision exposes another promise the king never had the power to keep. Because on that Friday morning, William didn't defeat Camilla. Diana did, and she never even had to enter the room.